Future Trends is brought to you by the Institute for Economics and Peace.
Welcome to the latest edition of Future Trends, the weekly briefing on the changing face of global politics, economics, development, social, and conflict. Here's this week's headline stories. India and Pakistan tensions rise after Kashmir attack. US and Iran progress over nuclear Palestinian Authority, calls for Hamas to release hostages and relinquish Gaza control. Chief Justice of Ghana suspended. Nepal to restrict Everest climbers. US and Iran say talks over nuclear program make progress. That talks are even happening represents a historic moment. Given the decades of enmity between the two countries since the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the US embassy hostage crisis. President Trump, in his first term, unilaterally withdrew from Iran's nuclear deal with world powers in 2018. Russia, one of the world powers involved in Tehran's 2015 nuclear deal, could be a key participant in any future deal. Tensions rise as Chief Justice of Ghana suspended. This marks the first time in the nation's history that a sitting Chief Justice has been suspended. President Mahama's administration claims the suspension is necessary to allow a fair investigation. However, opposition leaders accuse the president of interfering in the judiciary and attempting to install judges sympathetic to the ruling National Democratic Congress, UNRWA, not immune from lawsuits. The US administration has decided that the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees is not immune from being sued, reversing the US government's position that the organization was protected from civil liability. A lawsuit that aims to hold the agency, known as UNRWA, accountable for the October 7, 2023 attack on Israel by Hamas, has been filed by families of some of the victims of the massacre, alleging UNRWA aided Hamas by, among other things, permitting weapons storage and deployment centers in its schools and medical clinics, and by employing Hamas members. Gabon court confirms Nguema's victory in presidential election. Oligui Nguema won the election with 58,074 votes, which accounts for 95% of votes cast, according to the results announced by the Constitutional Court. The former head of the country's Republican Guard overthrew President Ondimba nearly 2 years ago. He hopes to consolidate power for a 7-year term and is set to be inaugurated on May 3rd. Indonesia in the spotlight amid military rivalry of major powers. Beijing and Washington have explored deeper economic and military ties with Jakarta, seeking to bolster their presence in a strategically located nation that straddles key global maritime trade routes and serves as a buffer between rival blocs. Canadian government re-elected. Prime Minister Carney's Liberal Party won Canada's federal election, capping a turnaround in fortunes in the wake of US President Trump's annexation threats and trade war. After polls closed, the Liberals were projected to win more of Parliament's 343 seats than the Conservative Party. Though it wasn't immediately clear if they would win an outright majority, at least 172, or would need to rely on one of the smaller parties to form a government and pass legislation. Moving now to stories in conflict. India and Pakistan tensions rise after Kashmir attack. India has suspended a water-sharing treaty, announced the closure of the mainland border crossing with Pakistan, downgraded diplomatic ties, and withdrawn visas for Pakistanis following the attack by gunmen on tourists, the region's worst attack on civilians in years. Pakistan warned that any move to restrict water would be considered an act of war. Gunmen shot dead at least 26 tourists at a resort in Indian-controlled Kashmir, in what appeared to be a major shift in the regional conflict, in which tourists have largely been spared. Palestinian Authority calls for Hamas to release hostages and relinquish Gaza control. PA President Abbas said Hamas should free the remaining hostages, disarm, and hand over control of Gaza to end the war with Israel. The Palestinian Authority, which controls parts of the West Bank while Hamas has run Gaza, said Hamas had given Israel excuses to continue its attacks on Gaza and told it to release the hostages and be done with it. Meanwhile, Israeli jets struck Beirut for the third time since the ceasefire, with Israel saying militant group Hezbollah had violated the agreement to end the war with the creation of a missile storage facility. Ukraine rejects peace plan ceding Crimea to Russia. The US brokered plan would recognize Russia's control over Crimea. Officials in Kyiv, insisting they will not formally surrender the Black Sea Peninsula annexed by Moscow in 2014, called the idea politically impossible and compared it to treason. US airstrikes target Yemen's Houthi rebels amid Red Sea tensions. The US has intensified its air campaign against Yemen's Houthi rebels, carrying out strikes across rebel-held areas. US planes hit Sana'a, where the Houthis claim a market strike killed 12 and wounded 34. Washington increased attacks in response to Houthi missile and drone launches at Red Sea shipping and Israel, aiming to pressure Iran over its support for the group. Sudan war enters third year amid famine and atrocities. The UN warns Sudan's civil war is now the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with fighting between the army and RSF killing around 20,000 people and displacing over 13 million. Recently, the army retook parts of Khartoum, while RSF militias massacred over 300 civilians in Darfur refugee camps, as half of Sudan's population faces acute hunger or famine. Pakistani troops kill 54 militants. Pakistani security forces killed 54 militants who attempted to cross into the country from Afghanistan, the military said, marking one of the deadliest such killings in recent years. The military said that intelligence reports indicated that the killed militants were Khawarij, a phrase the government uses for the Pakistani Taliban. Now, for the latest in economics. US set to offer Saudi Arabia over $100 billion arms package. Discussions are underway for a major deal despite wider Middle East tensions. The offered package comes after the former Biden administration unsuccessfully tried to finalize a defense pact with Riyadh as part of a broad deal that envisioned Saudi Arabia normalizing ties with Israel. IMF projects Asia-Pacific to grow by 3.9%. The International Monetary Fund projected that growth in Asia and the Pacific will slow to 3.9% this year, amid escalating trade tensions, marking a 0.5% decline from its previous projection. Kenya set to surpass Ethiopia as East Africa's largest economy. Kenya's steady growth trajectory positions it as the new regional leader, according to the International Monetary Fund. Tesla profit falls 71%. Tesla CEO Musk says he will be spending less time in Washington, reducing government costs, and more time running the electric vehicle company after a sharp fall in profits. The news was cheered by investors, sending the stock higher. Apple and Meta fined for breaching EU laws. The penalties were issued under the EU's Digital Markets Act, designed to give consumers and businesses more choice and prevent big tech from controlling digital markets. Apple was fined $575 million for preventing app makers from pointing users to cheaper options outside its App Store. And Meta $230 million for breaching privacy rules on Instagram and Facebook. Moving to development news. Saudi Arabia, Qatar to settle Syria's outstanding debt to World Bank. In the latest effort to help reverse the economic fortunes of a nation beset by years of war, Saudi Arabia and Qatar said they will pay down Syria's $15 million debt to the World Bank. Roche announces $50 billion investment in US over next 5 years. The investment would go toward high-tech research and development sites and new manufacturing facilities in places including California, Indiana, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. The investment would create 12,000 new jobs. From meat to grains, trade war is a boon to Brazil and Argentina. Brazil and Argentina are emerging as early winners in the global trade war that's upending agricultural markets. China's shift away from US products is shaping up to be a major driver of Brazilian and Argentine exports. China in April ordered a huge number of soybeans from Brazil, giving it a boost in its farming rivalry with the US, and recently reached a deal to restart poultry shipments from Argentina. Can the US recover from lack of rare earth materials? After the US launched its widespread tariffs on China, with imposts rising to 145%, Beijing issued a ban on the export of heavy rare earths to the US. These resources are vital not only to America's military defense systems, but to its continued lead in high-tech industries. China dominates the refining and production of rare earth materials, leaving the US highly vulnerable. Beijing takes control of tiny sandbank in South China Sea. The move by the Chinese Coast Guard at Sandy Cay, which is part of the disputed Spratly Islands, is the latest escalation of a regional dispute with the Philippines. With frequent confrontations, including vessels colliding, and finally, stories in social. Nepal to restrict Everest climbers. Permits will be limited to climbers with experience of scaling at least one of the Himalayan nation's 7,000-meter peaks, according to a proposed new law aimed at reducing overcrowding and improving safety. Nepal, which is heavily reliant on climbing, trekking, and tourism for foreign exchange, has faced criticism for permitting too many climbers, including inexperienced ones, to try to ascend the 8,849-meter peak. Hungary could suspend citizenship to silence dissent. The proposed bill is interpreted as targeting civil society, journalists and activists within Hungary and the diaspora, who refuse to fall in line. Electricity-free refrigeration for medical supplies to remote areas. A first-of-its-kind salt-based cooling solution is aiming to address problems with transporting vaccines, food and essential supplies to remote areas which are lacking in electricity. Thermovolt uses reusable salt-based endothermic reactions to create an electricity-free refrigeration unit, reducing plastic waste in the process as well. Light and sound stimulation improves cognition in Down syndrome mice. Studies by a growing number of labs have identified neurological health benefits from exposing human volunteers or animal models to light, sound and/or tactile stimulation at the brain's gamma frequency rhythm of 40 Hz. Uganda declares end to Ebola outbreak. The most recent outbreak led to 4 deaths. It was the 9th time the virus has been detected in Uganda, which has many tropical forests that are natural reservoirs for the virus.
Future Trends is brought to you by the Institute for Economics and Peace.